Joining us now is a professor of political science at Oakland University and also their director of the Center for Civic Engagement. Dave Dulio is with us once again on the MegaCast. Dave, thank you for being with us.
It's my pleasure, Tyler. Nice to see you.
Good to see you as well. And so big news politically recently here in the state of Michigan is the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission passed its legislative maps for both state Congress as well as federal positions as well. Of course, met with controversy and met with opposition as lawsuits have already been filed or will continue to be filed in that case. But for you, looking at that process and at the maps that have been redrawn, what is your biggest takeaway so far from the redrawn maps here in the state of Michigan?
Well, I think that there are a number of takeaways. One is the number of intra-party contests that we're probably going to see that are going to be really competitive in the summer during the primary season, right? We're going to have two, it looks like, incumbent matchups, Representative Stevens and Representative Levin running in the same district in the Democratic primary on the east side of the state, Representative Upton and Representative Huizinga running in a Republican primary on the west side. And there'll be some competitive primaries, no doubt. Maybe most notably over here on the east side is maybe that 10th district. It looks like there's a number of candidates that are potentially throwing their name in the ring or who already have thrown their name in the ring, especially on the Republican side. So that's one. I think controversy is another. And there are a number of controversies sort of surrounding the maps for either the state house, the state senate, or the U.S. House of Representatives. Certainly the lawsuit that's been filed by some representatives in the city of Detroit alleging the maybe disenfranchisement's the wrong word, but alleging a negative impact maybe on African-American voters in the city of Detroit and the dilution of their votes. We'll see how that shakes out in court. I think you'll see other lawsuits filed. This is going to get very litigious. With that, there is some uncertainty around this whole process. And as we start to see some things shake out with candidates announcing that they're going to run in certain districts, there still is uncertainty there whether or not the maps hold muster or pass muster in the courts.
And so if the courts do decide that the maps as drawn are inadequate because of violations of the Voting Rights Act or because of the disadvantages that they put certain populations at politically based on these maps being redrawn, that kind of in some ways resets the clock, because now you have the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission that has to go back and modify those maps. But at the same time, we are quickly approaching the primary season. How are candidates going to be preparing for that kind of a scenario where, like you said, they could be planning to run in one district right now in a very competitive race, and that might not be their final district down the line. At some point, the clock's going to have to run out, and these maps are going to have to be final.
Sure, and the way the constitutional amendment was written, so the law of the land, right, is that these maps, while approved by the commission at the end of December, they're not in effect until March, right? And then we've got the filing deadline that comes in April. So, right, that's really maybe one of the dates to really watch. But at the same time, this is really uncharted territory. We don't know what is gonna happen or could happen. If prior court cases in other states are a model to follow, you could have the courts kick it back to the commission, and depending on when that happened, would that 45-day comment period that the commission had to follow at the end of the calendar year 2021 be back in effect We don't know. Would they ask for relief from that from the courts? Would the courts impose their own maps that they would draw? It's really, you throw your hands up in the air and say, who knows?
Yeah, that creates a really interesting, but also really concerning scenario here in the state of Michigan, as we're approaching the point where these maps would have to be official in March for that filing deadline in April. Although I would expect that this would be resolved well before then. The courts are understanding of that situation. Certainly, the commission would be understanding of that situation too, knowing that these deadlines are coming up, and at some point we will reach the point of no return, where these elections have to be able to move forward.
Right, and we don't know where that is or what the mechanism for that will be, but at some point, yeah, we're going to have to move forward, and really the question becomes, how do we do that? And that's going to be up to the courts to decide.
We're joined by Dave Dulio, professor of political science at Oakland University, also their director of its Center for Civic Engagement as well. And so with these redrawn maps, as you said, lots of competitive races potentially coming in the primaries on both sides of the aisle later on this year. In some places, however, such as in the Lansing area in District 7, U.S. Representative Alyssa Slotkin of Holly said that she's planning to move in order to run for re-election. Or may move in order to run for re-election. Do you expect that as we get closer to that filing deadline, and as our political parties here in the state of Michigan and certainly federally on both sides of the aisle, that we may have more candidates attempting to do something like that, where they're moving out of these more competitive districts, where they'd be going up against other members of their own party, where they could potentially have two members of the same party that were previously in Congress at the state or federal level deducted to one by racing the other one out of a position. Do you expect that we could have more people potentially moving as we approach that filing deadline in order to put themselves in other districts that may be more competitive for them without potentially being a detriment to their party?
Sure. I think that's we've already seen some of that. Representative Slotkin, as you mentioned, has said that she's going to move into that new 7th district that's based, that's got Lansing at its core, but is a Republican-leaning district. One of the current state House members has said that he's going to run in that district against her on the Republican side. Representative Dingell is not going to run where she lives at the moment. She's going to move into a new district to accommodate that. But you can also see folks who don't live in a particular district running in that same district. There's no law at the congressional level in Michigan. There's no law that says you have to run in the district where you live. So, for instance, there's rumblings that John James may run in that new 10th district that's Macomb County based. He's, of course, from the Farmington area, but that's completely legal in the state of Michigan, where you don't have to, and that's been the case many times in the past. So it's going to be very interesting to watch how all of this shakes out over the course of the next weeks and months.
We're joined by Dave Dulio, professor of political science at Oakland University and also the director of its Center for Civic Engagement, joining us on the MegaCast. And so the whole point of this Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission, when it was enacted by the people by vote in 2018, was to take the drawing of the maps out of the hands of particularly politicians who are in the party in political power in Lansing every 10 years and put it more into the hands of the people to create a more egalitarian process. The process has been completed or almost completed in this sense. The maps have been drawn. Looking at how the maps are currently drawn right now and taking that as gospel going forward until further notice, based on how those maps have been drawn, where do you see the potential for the political landscape in the state of Michigan that's currently dominated on the legislative side by Republicans going forward? Is this a more competitive state now for Democrats at the legislative level after the redistricting?
Well, we'll see, right? I mean, I think that's the what many people were looking for as the commission was doing its work. We'll see, right? Because what we've heard so far is the analysis that's been done is that more districts are competitive or favor Democrats now than used to, and I'm gonna say that we'll have to wait and see on that, because the data that's been used for that analysis, at least what I've read and seen, is having used data from 2020, of which of course was a presidential year. And any good campaigner will tell you that when you're trying to predict election outcomes, you have to use like elections. And 2022 is obviously not a presidential year; it's a midterm year. In addition, so that's one thing, right? The midterm year versus presidential year. Midterm years always see lower voter turnout. So the mix of voters who will show up in 2022 is likely to be very, very different than it was in 2020. Adding to that is no Donald Trump on the ballot. Certainly no Joe Biden on the ballot, obviously, given it's a midterm election. But the other factor is the political dynamics that will be at work when that election happens. And right now, it looks like it's going to be a pretty tough year for Democrats. So what does that do to the mix of voters that turns out? Republicans are likely to be enthused with the prospects of reclaiming control of the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. We don't have a Senate race here in Michigan, but those new maps might put some juice into the Republican side to go and try to take some of those democratically held seats away. And both at the state House and state Senate level, plus the congressional level. So, we could see a very different result than what is being discussed or what's being assumed that we'll see after the 2022 cycle ends.
We're joined by Dave Dulio, professor of political science at Oakland University. He's also the director of its Center for Civic Engagement as well. And so, Dave, we have a few more minutes with you. I want to give you some time to talk about any upcoming events now that we are off in the new year that may be upcoming over at the Center for Civic Engagement that people may be able to join in on and begin a very big political year here in the state of Michigan with some productive conversations about our politics.
Sure. Thanks, Tyler. We're going to continue our office hours series where we highlight Oakland University faculty members, faculty experts on key issues. So in the beginning of February, we're going to do one on how the U.S. is responding to an uncertain global economy and talk about things like inflation, supply chain, gas prices, right? Those sorts of things, as well as the U.S. response to it. In early March, we're going to have a politics-focused discussion and, again, take up things like redistricting, evaluate where that is at the time, talk about the governor's race in 2022, those congressional races that you and I talked about. And then in the beginning of April, we're going to do one on mental health entering year 3 of COVID. As you know, as everybody knows, mid-March, we are going to go into the 3rd year of this pandemic, and we're going to evaluate sort of what we can do from a mental health perspective in dealing with COVID, dealing with this pandemic as we continue to struggle with it. We've got a couple other irons in the fire that we're not ready quite yet to talk about, but I hope you'll have me back and I can unveil those for you.
We certainly will have you back to talk about all those upcoming events and to continue to analyze a very important political year here in the state of Michigan as we're in 2022. It's a midterm election year. We've got the primaries coming up in just a few months, and then, of course, the gubernatorial election, also a big factor as well. Dave, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tyler.